How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Deciduous Bonsai Podcast. I'm Andrew Robson, a bonsai professional who specializes in deciduous trees at my garden, RAKUYO Bonsai, here in Portland, Oregon. And I have with me my friend, my student, and a good helper to the garden, Maciek.
Hello, hello.
And for today's episode, we're going to talk about Japanese maple.
That's right. Japanese maple.
So let's talk Japanese maple. What do you think people are most curious about in regards to Japanese maple?
Why is it special? Why does it seem to be so dominant in bonsai? Why did it get so heavily established, and why do we keep returning back to it?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think you could even ask a larger question: is why is the plant world in general, even outside of bonsai, obsessed with Japanese maple?
That is noticeable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of like the most,
especially around here.
Especially around here in Portland, Oregon. I mean, they almost look like they're native with how many that we have kind of scattered around.
You see some big ones here too.
Yeah, like ones that you could like mill into lumber.
Yeah,
like
I think we've actually had some people visit from Japan and say that some of the Japanese maples we have in Oregon are bigger than some of the ones they see in Japan.
Yeah, they get this is kind of prime growing conditions for them here, so it's nice here in my garden. You know, it's one of my favorite species. I think the leaf is just absolutely stunning. The colors that they can get in the fall and the variety of colors, you have some species like a ginkgo that will only ever be yellow. Japanese maple, you can get all different shades of red, orange, yellow.
Even during the season.
Yeah,
beginning of the season colors, mid-season colors.
Yeah, spring colors as well as variegation on the leaves as well. So it's just like it's just kind of a bulletproof plant that like everyone around the world is kind of zeroed in on and said,
so not just beauty, but you're saying also the diversity of beauty that we get out of it is
the
also
diversity
kind
of beauty. Yeah, I mean, if you plant 100 Japanese maple seeds, they're going to grow pretty different. They will correspond to the genetic that they came from.
Yeah.
But
anybody who has one in their front yard and collects seedlings every year will notice that. There's just like so many different leaf variations on
that's right.
from one tree alone.
Yeah. So there's just like a lot of variety in Japanese maple. The leaf is beautiful. There's something about the, asymmetry of those five, distinct points, and it's just a beautiful plant. The other benefit why Japanese maple is it's like one of the easiest things to keep alive in a bonsai pot. This plant has been cultivated for thousands of years, and it just responds really well to not just bonsai culture, but container culture and garden culture too.
But that's not it, right? That's not all of the story, right? Because if it was just easy to grow, there's lots of things that are easy to grow in a pot, but not necessarily easy to turn into bonsai. So what is it about Japanese maple that makes it respond well? Or have I given away the
it's a pretty
the answer?
It's a pretty simple plant to understand. It's an opposite leaf plant, meaning it has pairs of leaves and buds, which I think just to get ramification, just get a bifurcation, a branching, just pruning it back to the first pair is a pretty easy kind of rule of thumb to apply to it.
We see it divide into two branches.
You see it really clearly.
The gears turn into our heads.
Yeah. Also visually, I mean, there's so many beautiful things about Japanese maple. It's not just the leaves and the diversity of the leaves like we talked about, but the diversity of the colors like we also talked about. The bark, which can be incredibly diverse.
Like Sengokaku, for example.
It has a beautiful coral bark. You have Nishikigawa or Arakawa, which have rough conifer textured bark. You have just seedling selections from Japan that just have beautiful kind of gray bark with nice kind of striations on them.
Yeah, there's some stuff in this garden that there's some maples in this garden that have almost like a pinstripey style. That is just really, really beautiful.
Yeah, and a lot of them will kind of get that with age. And then the structure of them too. I mean, they're one of the nicest counterpoints to black pine, which is a really strong kind of intense tree. Japanese maples have an intensity, but in a very quiet way.
Yeah, it's sometimes whimsical too.
Yeah, whimsical or just really graceful, elegant kind of branches. The movements that you see in them, the all of these things together, the structure. It's just there's a reason that we've been using it for bonsai for a very long time. Because
would you say to some degree there's also kind of a built-in leaf reduction already to some degree, like that the leaf doesn't start out huge?
The leaf doesn't start out huge. As a deciduous artist, the leaf size is one of the least prevalent things that I talk or think about when choosing a plant for bonsai.
I may have teed up that question for you.
Yeah. I think leaf size has no kind of. Look, we have some beautiful deciduous bonsai here, like my winter hazels that have a naturally large leaf. You can ramify everything. You can reduce foliage on everything. Stuff can reduce. A Japanese maple, you don't really have to do that because it is already kind of somewhat small. There are some varieties like Osakasuki which might be a little bit larger.
So if I'm looking to get really good at deciduous bonsai eventually, but I have to get started somewhere, I can pick my battles at least at first and say, well, Japanese maple at least has that solved for me. I can learn this first, then I can get to leaf reduction techniques later.
Yeah. Japanese maple is the best kind of introduction to deciduous bonsai. I mean, it's going to be easy to keep alive in a bonsai pot in most climates. If you have kind of 4 distinct seasons. If you're in a continental climate or coastal climate, you can probably have Japanese maple. They don't respond well to the southern United States, so if you're in the southeast, southwest, you can struggle with them a little bit more.
You've got some other good options to switch to if you have that, though. You
can Tridents can take a little bit more heat, tropicals especially, but yeah, In most kind of climates with seasons, Japanese maple grows really well. You can find it at almost every garden center in North America, even the big box stores like Home Depot. It's popular for a reason.
Let's for a moment zoom in on what it means for it to grow well. I think of growing well as vigor.
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about? And there's another aspect to Japanese maple that I'm thinking of too, which is repeated vigor in 1 year once we've got a really strong tree.
Yeah, growing well in terms of it's predictable. So when I prune it back, I can very easily predict the response from the tree. It's grows well in terms of horticulturally. It's very easy. You can have water that's not quite ideal. You can have summers that are maybe a little hot and it will still kind of grow okay. It just works really, really well for bonsai in pot culture.
What about how quickly can we make trees that are interesting, sort of in the spectrum of deciduous broadleaf species?
Yes.
It fits in somewhere in that spectrum, and I feel like it fits somewhere in a very favorable part of the spectrum.
Yeah, and that was the third thing that I couldn't remember, or that lost my train of thought. Absolutely, it's one of the quickest plants to develop as a bonsai. Both Ebihara and Oishi, 2 of my favorite deciduous artists from Japan, developed Kokofu prize-winning trees in just a couple decades, which if we look at all the trees in Kokofu that win a prize, most of those are multi-generational trees, a tree that's been passed down for a few generations. A Japanese maple, you can do it in a lifetime, a single lifetime. If you're watching this, if you haven't retired yet, then you can grow a Japanese maple and win a prize with it in a show.
Yep. And going back to the popularity of it in the landscape and its just dominance at least in Oregon, but
it's everywhere and it's well deserved. I mean, it's a beautiful tree.
That kind of points to one other thing for me, which even if you can't find a field grower or somebody growing trunks, you might be able to go to a nursery and find a really strong Japanese maple that has fragments that you could air layer off.
100%.
It'll be super strong.
And most of the top growers, the roadmap for them to win those prizes in a single lifetime is to start with an air layer that gets your roots kind of 360-degree radial pattern right from the beginning. Put it in a shallow container. You already have a little bit more mass to play with than you would if you just had a seedling or something like that. And that genesis, that starting point is like the ultimate thing that you put that in a shallow grow box for 15 years, 20 years, and you can have a Kokofu prize-winning tree. A prize-winning tree in any major show in the world, if you do it right.
Would you say that the predictability of Japanese maple also extends to our working with the roots and creating nabari? And what could
everything's really easy
layering?
with a Japanese maple. It's some cars you get in and you have to really kind of fight it. Japanese maple is a little comfortable to drive. It's on cruise control. Japanese maple will
It's got air suspension.
It's got air suspension. Yeah.
It's got cooled seats.
Yeah. No, it's just like making a nice nabari is relatively easy. Growing a nice tapered trunk is relatively easy. Again, this is all in the context of comparing it to like other species that we use for bonsai.
Yeah, in that spectrum of deciduous.
Yeah, like trying to make a nabari on a ginkgo is significantly harder than trying to do it on a Japanese maple.
Actually, while we're on that topic of sort of making mass, working with wood mass, healing wounds.
Healing wounds easy to do on a Japanese maple.
No wound too big to heal, perhaps.
I've healed some, wounds that are 8-9 inches across on Japanese maple. But
for a lot of people, that might be the biggest wound they'll ever heal.
Yeah. So everything's within reason. The thing that's really interesting, though, is because the bark can be so kind of smooth and elegant and beautiful, you will see scars for a very long time. And so you don't want to be doing cuts that are too big, because then you'll, unless it's on the back or in a weird part of the tree around the side, you'll see it for forever. A good example of this, one of my good friends, Joe Harris, is the first American to go study bonsai in Japan with a formal apprenticeship.
Joe Harris from Isley Nursery.
He works at Isley Nursery, yep. He used to import a bunch of trees through their bonsai division. They closed the bonsai division, so now he just does the Japanese maples, along with a couple other things. But Joe manages, I think it's like 600,000 Japanese maples at Isley Nursery, and they don't make a cut on those trees larger than one of your fingers. If they fail,
they're just avoiding making bad wounds the whole way through.
Yeah, they're taking that, they don't start from air layer, but they're taking that young plant and they're just not letting kind of issues get built in any step of the way. And so nothing larger than a finger gets cut, which means when you buy a tree from Isley, and Isley's like the Rolex of nursery brands, you're going to get a tree that doesn't have scars. You're going to get a tree that has really beautiful branch structure. And it's because of a lot of those early decisions. But when Joe told me that, I was like, wow, you're really taking bonsai OCD to the nursery scale. Which is
he got inspired by what he saw in Japan for sure.
Yeah.
I don't want to forget this really important point, because I think this will come up with a lot of our discussions, and it's studyability.
Yeah.
It's like, how easy is it to study a species? And for me, that is kind of two things. Maybe multiple things, but among those things is just the amount of studyability or how easy could I find material?
There's so much wealth of information about Japanese maple.
I could pop open Kokufa albums and just see example after example after example, and to get a sense of what am I working towards? What are the best examples that I should sort of work towards?
Yeah. There's you can really easily develop your palate. You can really easily learn a lot of information about this type of plant in a way that if you were obsessed with cottonwoods, how many people have had a cottonwood bonsai before? Not very many. You and I are playing around with it, but
it'll take a while for us to make those examples.
But we don't have generations of knowledge on how cottonwoods work like we do Japanese maples. We don't have 100 kokufu exhibits, the top show in Japan, where we can look through and see, all of those trees. We do for Japanese maple, and so
would you say that kind of means that for deciduous broadleaf species, Japanese maple is kind of maybe aside from maybe ume or things like that, is maybe a species that gives us the best idea of what it is like to have deciduous bonsai that are very old. What happens in that long period, that multi-generational level?
Yeah, that's another benefit.
What should they look like? How are they maintained? Etc.
That's another benefit of Japanese maple, is the longevity of them. They can be in a pot for a very long time and not have trouble as they get older.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really, really fun plant for all of those reasons. And again, just the aesthetics of it, it's a type of deciduous bonsai that we treat a little bit more idealized. When I think of a Japanese maple, my thought isn't, a wild plant growing in the mountains of Japan. My thought is a a beautiful garden tree going in, some secluded garden in Kyoto or something like that, or a tree even locally in the Portland Japanese garden.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking of these kind of multi-stem kind of trees growing in the forest. I'm thinking of a very kind of cultivated tree, a tree that's connected to society and kind of human ideals and design a little bit more.
I feel like it's one of the species where you can really get a showcase of what it means to chase perfection.
Yeah.
Because there are so many opportunities to mess up and to have those mistakes compound over time. And the opposite of that, which is highly achievable with Japanese maple, is to just get it perfect for years and years, decades and decades, over and over, and then see the result of that. And it seems to be a very willing species in that regard, that you can fix some mistakes.
Yeah. It's like it's one of the few trees that you can like just geek out and have your whole collection be Japanese maples, and nobody would think that's weird. Like if I visited a garden, and I would personally love this, but if I visited a garden and some guy only had like 50 flame style ginkgos, like that would come off as weird in the bonsai world. That's a species that most collections have just one or two. Wisteria, the same thing. Most collections just have one or two. Me personally, would love to go to a garden and see 50 wisteria all together. But
that one person that really went whole hog on.
But there are actually a lot of people who like just do Japanese maple, and because there's so much diversity within the kind of Japanese maple family, you can really go far and keep yourself entertained.
So related to that, and also as a representative of the newer practitioners, and maybe the voice of the online scene, I've noticed something that many people who start with Japanese maple are starting with cultivars. Wide range of cultivars. Myself included. Many of my first Japanese maple were cultivars. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Cultivars are what we have access to, because if you go to the garden center, you're not going to find very many just green leaf Japanese maples kind of on their own roots.
Yeah, for me, it's been very rare to find a green leaf standard Japanese maple.
Yeah, anyway. Here in Oregon, we can do it.
Yeah.
But if you're in Missouri or Ohio or just anywhere not in the nursery capital of the United States, you're going to have a tough time finding just green Japanese maple on its own roots.
So that's the preferred genetic if you can get it, or you want to chop down to it.
Well, kind of, not really, because
it's a known good quantity, right?
Yeah. So kind of. Let me clarify.
Okay.
So when we look at a kokofu book, we're seeing a lot. Or when we just look at nice Japanese maples from Japan, we're seeing what appear to be just regular green leaf Japanese maples, but really they've been selected by the bonsai community. Think of junipers, where we have like, Itoigawa. This Itoigawa is like the one, and then we're just gonna or Kishu, and then we're just gonna take cuttings of that and spread that around. Even the plain green ones, have been selected
superior to nature.
Yeah, because you had a few generations of Japanese maple growers who were obsessed with finding, what is that good genetic? What is that one tree that just, worked really well? What's that one that has brilliant fall color, or that one that has beautiful bark?
So maybe there
even
is
if it's not a cultivar.
Yeah, maybe there is that perfect cottonwood that we'll find, but it would probably take us hundreds of years to find.
Yeah, or at least
it would take us a while, right? Because it took them hundreds of years in Japan. I think it's like 600-700 years that they've been.
Yeah, so we need people to do those experiments, to do that legwork. We need people to geek out about specific things. The nice thing about Japanese maple is people have geeked out on it already. Like that legwork has been done, and we get to enjoy all of the benefits.
And you're not.
So
the easiness of the species is not beneath you as a professional, right? It's you can still progress to more difficult.
Let me say one more thing about that. Like, if the tree that's just gonna behave like nonstop, like the tree that's never gonna lose a branch during the winter storm, the tree that's gonna just be bulletproof through the heat wave, the tree, like, you end up really favoring the trees that work for you, not against you.
Yep. Year after year.
Yeah, like ume is one of my least favorite trees, because it's just like...
I think you've done a video about this recently, right?
I haven't posted it. Not yet. It's in the queue. But it's Yeah, Japanese maple just behaves in a way that makes you say, "Oh man, I can see why people chose this. I can see why we have so many Japanese maples kind of around."
Yeah, it just makes sense.
Yeah. But going back to cultivars, normally we avoid cultivars and bonsai. Most cultivars, especially cultivars by kind of American and Western taste, are flashy for ways that we might not necessarily appreciate. Versus a lot of the cultivars that we use of Japanese maple for bonsai have been selected, 400 or 500 years ago. Like Shishigashira is like a 400-year-old,
right,
450-year-old cultivar.
There are some very delicate ones with variegated leaves and just intricate patterns and very soft foliage. They're not very vigorous. Would you steer people away from those? Would you say, hey, maybe try stronger Japanese maple first?
Yeah, the ones that I tend to avoid are the more dwarf ones. And the ones that have really weird growth habits. One that fits into both of those categories is Mikawa Yatsubusa.
It looks like a lot of nodes in a very
it looks like a marijuana tree. The leaves, the growth is like incredibly weird and not a beautiful way, in my opinion. And the leaf, like the nodes are so dense that it's really fighting you in the early development stage. So, I think a Shishigashira or a Kotohime are both dwarfs that work kind of for you, and Mikawa Yatsubusa is kind of a tricky one.
Let's get into those dwarf cultivars for a second.
Dwarf cultivar Japanese maples.
Learning those cultivars here really opened my eyes as to density management. So it's
a totally different technique.
Yeah.
What we do to a regular green leaf Japanese maple is radically different than what we do to a Shishigashira.
Yep.
With your typical Japanese maple, we're trying to shrink the internode down.
You're trying to work towards density.
Yeah.
And that density is a higher density than when you're at
we don't get it for free, and we're trying to create that. And so we have 2-inch internodes that we're trying to get down to 1/2 inch. We have really coarse growth that we're trying to get more compacted. With a Shishigashira, you're going to get all that for free. The thing that you're not going to get is a long runner that's going to create caliper and create wood and tissue behind it to play with.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that Japanese maple, when you start to zoom in on it, it's almost like it gets bigger and bigger of a space the more you look at it. There's an intricate set of trade-offs even within one species, and Japanese maple is a great place to explore those ideas because you and I can buy the exact same genetic of dwarf cultivar actually trade notes about it and learn something very specific together that we know is kind of,
Yeah, 100%. One example of that is, I found that Nishikigawa will bark up about 10 times faster than Arakawa. If you want a rough bark maple, an Arakawa can get you there. It's time tested and proven, but it's going to take a very long time. Nishikigawa, I have a few that were grown at Telperion farms. I have 20-year-old trees that look like they're 100-year-old, Arakawa. So there's a lot of kind of little nuances between a lot of the different varieties, and even really similar varieties like Nishikigawa, Arakawa that are kind of have the same look but behave very differently. One variety that I really, really love is Desojo. In fact, I don't know that I would ever grow a green leaf Japanese maple again. I think if I wanted something that had green leaves in the summer, I would grow Desojo because you get the lipstick bright red in the spring, which is just like
the fall. Yep.
And that it turns into like a beautiful red in the fall. It's like,
and you've got the vigor somehow. Even with all that showiness, you haven't really lost. Vigor.
It's not as vigorous as greenleaf, but it's like
still vigorous than vigorous than many other.
It's like 20% less vigorous.
Yeah.
So you can still develop a nice trunk, nice nabari.
Yeah.
In Japan, actually, right now, Bill Valvanis just told me that they're thread grafting Desojo on the primary branches of many old Japanese maples and then rebuilding the silhouettes with that Desojo.
So it's almost like, to draw an analogy from junipers, they're changing
it's almost like
clothes.
grafting Itoigawa onto a native juniper.
One of those trends sweeping Japan. It's interesting.
Yeah, and it like takes the price and like 10x's it to the buyers. And so...
Yeah, and I think just to give us a sort of base reference point, like 20% less vigorous. My
on a plant that's already really vigorous, isn't that
it's
big
still
of a
vigorous enough for multiple defoliations in one summer if you've got a strong Deshojo.
I really like Desojo. It's not as sun tolerant. That's the biggest thing you have to watch out for on it. Otherwise, it behaves almost the same as greenleaf Japanese maple. But that the spring color, especially like the fall color, is good. The spring color, though, like in this garden, you could have I could have like a little tiny pre-bonsai Desojo, and it could be like all the way in the back of the garden, and I could see it. Like it will like electrify the line of sight. Like it's a really special variety. So
Japanese maple is a great learning platform.
it is.
It does seem to be, right? Even for things like defoliation or leaf cutting or leaf reduction.
Yeah,
there's a range of things we can do to it.
I think it's like the deciduous equivalent of black pine. It's a really good tree to learn kind of basic tree energy, tree balance.
Anything you do to it that's consistent will have a consistent response, and different consistent approaches will have different consistent responses.
That's right. And we haven't even talked styles yet. I mean, there's such a diversity of styles that a Japanese maple can be. You can have a really beautiful informal upright. You can have a clump style. I've seen beautiful Japanese maple forests. Cascades are, there's not many deciduous trees that you think of as cascades, but a Japanese maple for some reason kind of makes sense in that category.
Or a cascade feeling, as we call it here.
Cascade feeling, really strong directional tree. It just really...
I've seen some beautiful ones of that. I think also we shouldn't end this without at least mentioning amazing shohin capabilities as well.
Yeah, it works pretty well for shohin, especially actually some of the more dwarf varieties, or that's where the seedling selection comes in a little bit more in play, getting a selection that is really nice and compact.
What about wireability within a season?
Japanese maples are pretty flexible, and they're pretty tolerant of beginners and intermediate people wiring them.
A little bit of bite in.
Yeah. The bite in will stay for a while, but you don't harm the branches on a Japanese maple as much as you might on another tree. They're pretty tough tree.
As much lossiness.
Yeah. So if you're new at bonsai, it's a great thing to kind of start with. Like we said, if you can't find Japanese maple bonsai to start, go to a garden center, find a variety that you like Desojo, like a coral bark, like Shishigashira, and take some air layers. I mean, that's the genesis. That's the roadmap for most beautiful deciduous Japanese maples in Japan, and it just works really well.
You have that super strong nursery plant, treat it as a mother plant, make 10 air layers.
10 air layers.
And make 10 small trees and learn in parallel.
Yeah, there's a lot of great information out there about the species. There's a lot of beautiful examples. It's one of my favorite trees. I'll end with a little bit of a story about Japanese maple. A lot of people think native means what naturally grows around you, and I think that's fine. But when I grew up in St. Louis, my dad was a big gardener, and every single weekend, it seemed like we would go to the garden center. And my earliest memory of a tree is not a native tree to St. Louis, Missouri. My earliest memory of a tree is Japanese maple. Is running around and playing underneath this huge selection of Japanese maples at an old nursery called Crabapple Cove.
That's cool. That's sugar maple for me, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's like that's my first memory of a tree. That's like the tree that I'm most connected to. And so when you come here to RAKUYO, there's more Japanese maples than any other kind of species in the garden.
Cool.
I have like 20, 30 of them. But yeah, it's just a great plant. I love it for bonsai. There's a reason that pretty much everyone loves it, and it's beautiful all 4 seasons. It just has a lot going for it.
Sure does.
So, well, thanks for tuning in. You've been listening to the Deciduous Bonsai Podcast. You can find us on Bonsai Wire for audio, or on RAKUYO's Deciduous Bonsai channel on YouTube for a video format. I'm Andrew Robson. My co-host is Maciek, and we will see you on the next episode.
See you guys.